Now.
Welcome to the Lawrence County Museum and to Durant's lecture. He's one of our best historians for the American Revolution, and we're glad that he's here with the art tour to talk to us a little bit more about the Native Americans, agricultural, and the early pioneers. And I'm sure he will connect it to the Revolution.
There's tie-ins for sure.
No doubt about that. Is anyone here for the first time to the museum? Oh, good.
They came back.
The harp music.
Oh, the harp music is upstairs during the exhibits up there. Well, not exhibits, but the booths up there. Make sure that you visit. There's some pretty things. And there's some other artists coming tomorrow. In fact, I think most of them will be here tomorrow. Welcome. Thank you, Grant.
Thank you. I guess I'll have a seat here as we talk. Everybody can see the screen. And appreciate everybody being here this morning on a hot Saturday morning. It's going to get hotter as the day progresses, I'm sure. But what we're going to be talking about today is Native American planting and agricultural techniques. You know, it was obviously a different world back then. It was during Stone Age times. There were Stone Age techniques that were utilized by the Native Americans, but it was brilliant the way that they incorporated these techniques with their natural environment, and their lives depended on that. The first cultivated plant in the Western Hemisphere was not an agricultural product. It was not a foodstuff. It was the gourd. And we're pretty sure that these gourds floated over from Africa because they also showed up in Indonesia about the same time, but they've traced this back and know that these are based from Africa. So these gourds actually floated across the Atlantic Ocean. And the Native Americans in the Caribbean, started collecting these, and they started planting these, and they started using gourds because it's very functional as a bowl, as a spoon. You could heat up a rock red hot in a fireplace and take it and put it in a gourd filled with water with meat in there, seasoned with the local spices, and now you've got stew. Other kind of applications for gourds. And it's assumed that it was 10,000 years ago that gourds were first planted.
Excuse me, do you think in Africa that where they came from, they were cultivated there?
Yes, I would say so, yeah. Wouldn't be surprised a bit. Wouldn't be surprised a bit. So one plant that, the Western Hemisphere is most noted for, obviously is corn or maize. But corn does not grow in wild. So where in the world did it come from? And where we think it came from was a wild plant called teosinte. And that's teosinte on the left and maize on the right. It was developed through human intervention. And I just saw this schematic on the internet, so I said, oh, well, we'll see what we have here. So this shows the progression, a slow progression of teosinte into corn, and how this developed over the thousands of years through the hand of man. Now, I don't exactly know how this cultivation process occurred, but this is development of maize or corn, which is one of the most important crops that was ever grown in the Western Hemisphere. Because the Native Americans were able to engage in agricultural endeavors, they started forming a stable townships, a more structured, civilized society. They continue to be hunter-gatherers as well, and that was very important in Native American culture. But through the introduction of agriculture, now that townships can be formed. And this is a typical Cherokee town, and I'm going to kind of be going back and forth between Cherokee and Native American in my descriptions of what we're talking about here. The Cherokees did not have a particularly unique type of agriculture. This agriculture was shared by the Creeks and the Catawbas and the Muskogeans and just about everybody. It was universal in how they dealt with the agricultural processes. About the only difference I've been able to read about is in the northern plains, in the Massachusetts colonies. They did fertilize their mounds with shad, but I don't see a record of the Cherokees doing anything like that. But again, typical Cherokee town. Quite frequently, they would have 100 homes in these towns. All 7 clans would be in one town, particularly if it was a healthy clan, a healthy town. There would be 500 individuals in these towns. There would be a great house where the community could come together for important events. I'm going to be talking a little bit later on about the description that William Bartram wrote of Cherokee towns in 1775. Our first mention of Cherokees and the Cherokee culture comes from Hernando de Soto, when he had his mission through the backcountry of South Carolina in 1540. And if you'll notice, I don't know if my laser pointer won't work. These little huts beside each of the larger homes, the conical huts that are scattered throughout, and they're beside each home. These are areas where there was a fire built underneath, and this rain shelter little hut there, they would smoke meat on that. And the priests that were with him, Hernando Soto, described these little huts, and they referred to them as barbacoas. So the Cherokees invented barbecue. The Cherokees, Native Americans, had an amazing interaction with the environment. They could read a forest better than we will ever be able to do so here in the 21st century. This shows chestnut trees, and you can see some of the human figures that are in there. You know, chestnut was the most dominant hardwood in our forest. Chestnuts provided a constant source of food. So, you know, if you had nothing to eat for days on end, you would always find chestnuts, and they sustained quite a number of fellows over the centuries. The bark from chestnut trees and the bark from poplar trees were both coverings that they used. It would come off in big slabs. And this is what they thatched or covered their roofs of their homes with.
Turn right.
Did that damage the tree?
It would kill them.
I mean, that's what I assumed, like girdling it.
I'm going to go over that.
Okay.
I'll take this opportunity to say I love questions. And I love questions at the end, if you will. Quite frequently, the question I get is just my next sentence that I'm getting ready to. But questions are good. The forests were the publics of the Native Americans. The forests were the pharmacies of the Native Americans. The Cherokee shamans, who were the healers, they knew the properties of 400 plants. They knew what plant, the roots would kill you, but the leaves were good for you. Or the leaves would kill you, but the roots were good for you. And that's important. And they knew what plants would alleviate constipation, or what plants would alleviate diarrhea, or if you ate some meat that was tea. So all sorts of useful plants, curatives, they found in the forest, the native forest. So here is the beginning of Cherokee agriculture. And it begins with taking the bark off of the tree, girdling that tree, killing that tree. The Cherokees had a 10-year plan in their agricultural fields. So after they girdle the tree here and it starts to die, now they have a constant source of firewood for the next 5 or 6 years. So this is all part of the process. They chose their areas for planting and based it on a 10-year cycle. So after year 2, and this shows year 2 of an area that has been cleared of its trees. It could be a tree fall gap. Cherokees and Native Americans made great use of tree fall gaps, or it could have been an area that they girdled the trees so that the vegetation would, the trees would die. Then, when the vegetation got this thick, they would use, they would burn it off. Slash and burn. Slash and burn were the techniques that the Cherokees used for preparing their fields. And once they had a field cleared, they would put the hillocks in. And this is where they would plant corn, for instance. They would plant 4 kernels in there. This is, I think this is universal. One for the mouse, one for the crow, one to rot, and one to grow. The Cherokees in particular had a strict division of labor. And you will notice that is the lady here who was doing the work in the agricultural field. And the gentleman is sitting on a log smoking a pipe. Does this sound like a pretty good deal?
Sounds kind of
Have
like.
things changed? I don't know. But if he's the father of the baby in the papoose right there, he's not paying that baby any attention. But if he is the brother of her, then he is raising that child. That's the way it was in Cherokee society. Fathers did not raise their children. Children were raised by their uncles. And part of the matriarchal society, keeping the clan strong. That was one of the primary duties of the Cherokee maidens, is to produce strong clan members. And that's a big part of how their society was set up. The division of labor, the women provided the food in the summertime, and the men provided the food in the wintertime through honey. So that's how they, and they, you know, they wanted balance in the Cherokee society, and they avoided pollution. So if a man was out helping weed and water the fields in the middle of summer, they would feel like pollution was occurring, and that was a bad thing, and you didn't want that. But this is the classic planning scheme that the Cherokees utilized. This is referred to as the 3 sisters, and I know everybody here really is familiar with that. But it's corn, beans, and squash. They would plant the corn in those hillocks, and as they started to come up, then they would plant the beans so they would grow up the corn stalks. And they would plant squash at the base, big leafy squash that would shade out the ground, hold moisture better, and also prevent weeds from coming up. So this is the 3 sisters, the corn, beans, and squash. Now, the Cherokees did not have calendars. They did not have a book telling them that April 15th is the last frost date considered in the Piedmont, and that if you wanted to plant corn, tomatoes, or anything else, April 15th is the time to do that. But again, they didn't have a calendar, and there's times they would have planted on April the 1st, and there's times they would have planted on May the 1st. But the reason for that is they were looking at nature. And what they were looking at was they noticed that when the leaves on an oak tree were the size of a mouse's ear, to a large extent, agriculture did dictate Cherokee life, where they set up their towns, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about that later. They did have their towns on river banks, and I will tell you this, the Cherokees picked the most beautiful places in South Carolina to have their towns. They really did. We have a wonderful description of Cherokee towns in the layout from William Bartram, who was a famous botanist who traveled through the entire Southeast talking about the flora and the fauna that he encountered, but he also talked about the Native American ways and traditions that he came across as well. And he has a wonderful description of the town of Seneca. Seneca was on the Seneca River, and this is where the Clemson campus is. William Bartram was standing on the area about where Fort Rutledge is now, which is one of the high peaks, and he was overlooking the town of Seneca down below him. And what he described was 100 homes on the far side of the river. On the near side of the river was where the council house was and where the leading man apparently lived. So he also describes the agricultural fields. He says for 4 miles up and down the Seneca River right there were the agricultural fields that had been cleared, and this was where the corn, beans, and squash was being planted. And he says at the edge of the field they had taken muscadine vines and strewed them through the tree line so that they would be exposed to that full sun setting, especially for the southern facing tree line there. And they would harvest those muscadines during the fall. That muscadine vine also served as fencing to help keep deer out, which I'm sure was as much of a curse then as it is today. William Bartram also describes his visit to the town of Kiowee, which is on the Kiowee River. The Kiowee and the Seneca River are actually the same river, but it doesn't matter today because both of these are totally underwater. Seneca River is under Lake Hartwell. On William Bartram's approach to Kiowee, he said the forelocks of his horses' hooves were absolutely pink from when they trampled through the strawberry fields that were surrounding the Cherokee lower town capital of Kiowee. And, that's quite interesting. And the Cherokees, they would eat those wild strawberries, there's no doubt about it. But there's not a lot of sustenance to them, there's not a lot of flavor. But some of the early botanists took some of those wild strawberries and they sent them to France, to a monastery in France, where the monks started raising these wild strawberries. Well, somebody else down in South America sent a strain of strawberries to the same monastery in France. Now, the South American strawberries are hardly any fruit at all. Big old leafy thing, but it hardly produce any fruit. And the monks, they were just, tending to these 2 different strawberry patches in their gardens. Well, all of a sudden they noticed that these strawberries intercross with each other and interbred. And it produced the biggest, most delicious strawberry that you could absolutely imagine. So that is the strawberry that we eat today. But it comes from that monastery in France, and if those strawberry patches had not been planted close to each other, there's no telling the strawberry would have been lost from the annals of history. But that's just one example of how the interplay with humanity, humans, and nature does sometimes have beneficial effects, not always. So, the backcountry of South Carolina was wonderful virgin territory. And I should put quotes around virgin. Our territory, our landscape has been manipulated for 10,000 years. We've only been here for 200 or 300 years, Europeans. not just leave the land alone. They manipulated the land, and one of the primary ways that they manipulated the land was through fire. So, you know, even when the original pioneers came down here into this area, they were not looking at virgin land. But to them, it was virgin land because of all the potential that the land had. And this land had incredible potential. And there was pressure to settle this land. Now, the people along the coast of South Carolina, the British colonial government, they were all for settling the backcountry. They wanted the backcountry settled so that there was a shield between the Native Americans and the bad actors in the Native Americans who were coming into the backcountry committing depredations. You know, there was a ranger down in Musgrove Hill. He referred to these newcomers, settlers, the pioneers, as meat shields. So, with the pressure for development back here, the British colonial government in 1755, and I'm going to use this word, bought the area that later became the 96th district from the Cherokees. This is in the Treaty of Salute, 1755, that awarded 10 western counties in South Carolina. Now, not Greenville, Anderson, Pickens, and Oconee counties. Those were Cherokee territory. But the 10 counties that became 96th district, and now is 10 counties, that area was ceded, and this was referred to as ceded Cherokee territory, ceded to the British colonial government. The sale price was gifts and other considerations. And that could mean anything. The boundaries were determined. Now, the only boundary that was actually fixed was the Broad River, which was the traditional boundary between the Cherokees and Catawbas. But those other boundaries, I mean, it's from the oak tree on top of this hill to the pine tree across the river over there. You could hardly follow those boundaries, and that led to problems later on. But when the backcountry was open now, 1755, now western South Carolina is the frontier of America. And it's virgin land, and that's what settlers wanted. That's what people who came in from Philadelphia into Pennsylvania, and they look around, Pennsylvania's full of folks. We can't live here. They started coming further south, Great Wagon Road. They started settling in Virginia. They started settling in North Carolina. 1755, virgin territory, 10 counties worth. Let's come into this area. You could stake your claim. The land belongs to the British government. You pay them for it. Or they had programs. They had grant programs. Dutch Fork was settled through grants, bounty grants. There were townships that were set up in the backcountry, 20,000 acres apiece, and you could go stake your claim there. These townships were set up on Native American travel routes, so that if there was an uprising, it goes right through Boonesboro Township, which is on the Cherokee Path in Abbeville County. Well, all those settlers there, they're going to catch the brunt of that attack. People down along the coast, you know, will be nice and safe down there. This is part of what led to the Long Canes massacre in the Cherokee War of or the first Cherokee War, 1758 to 1761. So these settlers come down. Now they also had a quit rent program where you stake your claim and you pay rent on that property for 2 years. And then an inspector comes through, and if he sees you've made suitable improvements to that property, like put up a home or a barn or both, then you could quit your rent and you own that place outright. So different techniques for land settlement development, and this is one way that the colonial government was financing themselves. So settlers are starting to come in. And they would come down on their Conestoga wagons. You know, the Great Wagon Road, this is what they used. And the plan was to get here in very late winter or very early spring. And when they got into the area, they would set up their camp. And they would live in that wagon, or they would live under that wagon. And the first thing they would do was they would start clearing land for planting. You know, you take two 18-year-olds that have two young children and more on the way, but with an axe and a knitting needle, they could tame the world. And that's what they did. And you were prosperous by the sweat of your brow. And these young pioneers would come into the area, clear land. The first thing that they would plant, they wanted to clear enough land so they could get their first crop in, you know, early spring, about mid-spring, when the leaves on an oak tree with the size of a mouse is there. And what they were planting would be corn and flax. That's how important clothing was back then. They only had one set of clothes, and that was it. And so they would, you know, manufacture their own flax, which is I've read the 23 steps that go through there. There's no way I could do all that. They would have sheep. They would have every farm animal that was imagined. Cattle, goats, horses, oxen, donkeys, mules, everything. Guinea. I don't know if they had guineas or not. They had chickens, rabbits, you know, you name it, they would grow it or breed it. That's how the pioneer economy started to work then. You know, you raise your crops and you grow your cattle. And you would grow enough corn to last, you know, through the winter. Now, what the Cherokees did as far as preserving their corn, they dug pits in the ground, and then they took poplar bark and lined those pits, put the corn in there, and covered it over. And that would last through the winter. What Hernando de Soto did in 1540 when he came through South Carolina with these big, massive horses that were just terrifying to the Native Americans, he would rip up those corn caches and feed that winter supply to the horses. So it was a tough time for the Native Americans after Hernando de Soto came through, plus the fact that there were 10 million Native Americans in 1525. By 1775, when the Revolutionary War started, there were 1 million Native Americans, 90% death rate. So that was devastating. The smallpox was the primary culprit there, European diseases. So, you know, the economy was slowly building up. And I just recently realized this. The British colonial policy, you know, is because of their policies is why we rebelled. They didn't want anything coming from America other than raw goods. They wanted rice kernels. You know, they wanted indigo plants. Later on, they just wanted cotton and everything. They didn't want manufactured goods. They didn't want the backcountry or the people in the colony to be able to finish off the raw goods that they had planted. This is how England had it going on. They would have manufactured goods they would follow the trade route. They would have manufactured goods in England, raw products from America, leather going to England, be made into pants and clothes and everything, shipped down to Africa. These finished goods would then be traded for slaves. Slaves coming to America, and then raw products going back to England. There was a three-way circle activity that was going on there, the economy that was going on. And the British digressing a little bit here, but they even passed a law. This is how I found out about it. I just realized. They passed a law called the Iron Act, whereby there could not be iron manufactured in the United States, in America. It had to be shipped to England to be factored. We couldn't build iron factories here. We did have foundries. There were 2 foundries that were in South Carolina, Walford's Iron Works in Spartanburg, and Hill's Iron Works near the North Carolina border. But speaking of economy, those were the only industries that were in the back country. And these industries fostered other industries, like the charcoal industry, for instance, to get these foundries hot enough to melt iron ore. But another way that manufacturing added to profit in the backcountry of South Carolina, and believe me, this whole thing was about profit, which is not an ugly word. There couldn't be profit without security. There wasn't security in the backcountry. You couldn't be prosperous if you had to guard yourself against, highway robbers coming through all the time. So there wasn't enough security in the backcountry was one of these issues. But one of the things that was manufactured in the backcountry for profit was alcohol, whiskey. You could take a wagon load of corn to the mill and you may get £1 for that. But you could get 10 gallons of moonshine in your wagon, take it to wherever, and you got £1 for every one of those gallons. So now you get 10 pounds for what you could have got, just 1 pound for. So this just made sense. It was a way to preserve your corn crop, if you will. It was a way to develop your corn. So
Easier to ship.
much easier to ship. So that was part of the agricultural process. So one thing that was looked at as far as where to start your fields and so forth was the bottomlands. And the Cherokees, that's where their towns were in the bottomlands. And one unique feature that the South Carolina bottomlands had was river cane. And here you can see how tall this river cane is. One thing that the Native Americans knew, wherever river cane grows, corn will thrive. So they burned off the corn. Now, the river cane was probably the most valuable plant of all for the Cherokee. They built their houses out of this. They built cane bottom chairs. They built fishing baskets to catch fish with. They built blowguns out of it. They built flutes out of it. It was just extremely, extremely useful. But everywhere that cane grew, corn would thrive. And so the early pioneers realized this, and this is why they looked for fertile land. Like the Long Cane's development in Abbeville County, that's where the tallest cane was in the area, and that is where the richest agricultural land was as well. This is just a scene of early pioneer life. It's actually showing those fellows gathering firewood. Typical pioneer scene. I just got this because it looks old-timey, but anyway. Here's a fellow in the upper corner who is reaping wheat. Now, the early pioneers, like I told you, corn, beans, and squash, they grew that. They also grew every kind of grain that there was available. Wheat, rye, oats, barley, you name it. But they had to harvest it by hand with this sickle here, or scythe. And imagine using a sickle this small to harvest your wheat with. Now, I had to get in a Revolutionary War scene. You wouldn't know that I did. But this is how wheat was harvested. On your hands and knees with a little sickle like that, cutting it like this. My ex-father-in-law, who grew up on a farm in Tennessee, said when he was 10 or 11 years old, that's how he cut the front grass, crawling on his hands and knees with that scythe like that, cutting the grass in the front yard. This is the scene where Mrs. Martha Bratton is being threatened with having her head cut off if she didn't tell a burly Irishman named Henry where her husband was, Colonel William Bratton. And the British authorities knew that William Bratton was at home collecting. They knew that the Patriot Colonel, where are they? We got to find them. Well, they're all home harvesting their wheat crops. So for 3 days, it was kind of open season. And so the British sent patrols out looking. And they wanted to find out where Miss Bratton's head was. Fortunately, Lieutenant Adamson coming up the steps there, he saved Martha Bratton's life in the nick of time. And Henry didn't cut her head off. But at the end of the battle, of Huck's defeat, where Christian Huck is mortally wounded, and Lieutenant Adamson is severely mauled across the face with the saber cut, unrecognizable. He is threatened with murder. He's about to be murdered because he thought he was the one with the breathing hook there. Martha Bratton heard him speak. She could not recognize him due to his wound, but she heard his voice, and she realized then that it was her savior who was about to be executed. And she saved Lieutenant Adamson. So we're grateful for that. But you got all of that because of the size of that breathing hook right there. So there's another vignette in this picture here in the upper left-hand corner there. You may tell me what this fellow's doing? You can see he's got some device that's got a handle on it. I guess he turns that. Down in his left hand there, looks like he's got a spear tip. I don't know what that contraption is that may be drugged or turned or something like that. But anyway, I thought somebody in here would know what that is. Y'all get to it.
Is he plowing?
Excuse me?
Plowing?
Why would you plow with a spear tip like that? And he would be...
To turn the soil.
Maybe.
To make a
That
place
makes
for
as
the
much sense as
seed.
anything, I suppose.
Using the spear, you cut the tangles.
So does anybody have any questions at this time?
Going back to the division of labor, you said the men hunted, the women farmed. How about fishing? When they set up fish dams and harvested the fish, was that?
I've seen pictures of ladies in the water.
It was probably both of them, or?
I could say, particularly if it required teamwork, everybody would work together on the planting, and everybody would work together during harvesting. But the women would be doing the watering and weeding. Yes.
We spoke about ironworks in Spartanburg. Where was the iron ore coming
The
from?
iron ore was laying on top of the ground. It was surprising. South Carolina, and Piedmont in particular, is very rich in iron deposits. That's why our soil is red from the iron in the soil. But and even today, I can find clusters of iron deposits just right on top of the ground, and it's kind of easy to spot iron ore if you look for it. But it's always covered with a brown rust. It's oxidized, so that's a clear indication of it. Plus the fact that it's heavy. The Hills Iron Works I'm not sure if it's York or Chester County, but it's right next to the Catawba Indian Reservation. That's where William Hill set up his ironworks. And one reason for that is because Gaffney, limestone college in Gaffney, Gaffney's about the only place you find limestone in South Carolina. And it is a necessary material for iron foundries. But the other thing is the east face of Kings Mountain, which is not far at all from where Hills Iron Works was. Apparently that was just rich and loaded in all kinds of minerals. And many of the fellows who fought at Kings Mountain were very familiar with that area because they'd been gathering it. They used it as a hunting camp for So it was literally, laying on the ground. And even, I just did a few months ago, finished a landscape job in the middle of downtown Greenville. And I saw, these people was looking at it and saying, you know what those brown logs are? And their yard was full of iron ore. I was building retaining walls out of iron ore in those people's walls, in those people's yard. They didn't know it. So I got you a nice little iron ore tonight. Thank you. We got enough iron ore now.
How about the coal?
You're talking about the bauxite, right? The volcanic rock. The little round, they get rounded because of chips. It's the same as granite. It's just cools faster, and so it doesn't form the crystals in it, right? And it's all orange on the top. You break it open, it's black inside.
Right.
Yeah, oh yeah, it's everywhere here.
And if that's what you're saying,
we got it
that's what we're
everywhere.
talking about.
So that's what they were using for iron ore.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Yes.
I think, I'm from York County, I think Hills is probably up there around Clover, which is not far from Kings Mountain. One of those little mountains, like Crowder's Mountain or Nanny's Mountain,
Right.
one of those little places right there.
Those are some of the oldest mountains. They're older than the Appalachian Mountains. Some speculation that they may have been ancient volcanoes, very ancient. And that's just the core of what's left. But, as much erosion as there's been over the hundreds of millions of years, those mountains could have, been way underground, would have been way underground, for millions of eons.
Gun Barrel Hill up there at Barksdale, did they get that iron from somewhere else, or I reckon they manufactured?
Yeah, that I don't know. I don't know about that one.
And that-
Would have been Revolutionary War.
You know that little mountain that's right there in between Gray Court and Lawrence, they call it Gun Barrel Hill. I don't know.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me a bit if you could get iron ore from that area. Wouldn't surprise me in the least. Yes.
I was thinking, when you were talking about the Three Sisters, about all the trouble I've had over the years with squash plants, with the borers. And now I did discover a way to keep them from cutting down my squash to start with, and that was to wrap foil around the very base. But do you think the Native Americans had a secret for keeping borers out of their squash?
That's a very good question. I think that the timing on the squash is absolutely crucial as far as keeping the borers out. Also, it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't have borers back then, that the borers came from China or who knows what.
Well, the Europeans did bring pigs and hogs, and there would have been some wild ones that escaped.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yes.
I was just wondering where your basic information about the Cherokees and the older time came from. Was you're talking Bartram now, of course that's 200 years after DeSoto, and 200 years is a long time for things to change.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've seen on DeSoto, they didn't give a hoot about the Indians.
No, they didn't, but a lot of my information is from the DeSoto diaries, that Priest wrote. And I've been trying to make sense out of it. I mean, some of what they write, you can't hardly make sense of. They're much more interested in how many souls they say they saved versus, any reference to cultural activities is just casual.
You remember did you read the barking dogs, the non-barking dogs that they fell upon?
When you talk about DeSoto?
DeSoto. Yeah, when they got up too close to, so they didn't hit the Cherokee thing because they were going up through the Catawba land areas. They went up to Rock Hill area.
Yeah.
And they said those are the poorest people they'd ever seen anywhere in the world. but they were looking for food, and they said we came to a village, and they were raising these little non-barking dogs in cages, and we just fell upon them and ate them all.
I didn't know there were dogs here.
I think they're possums.
Well,
You have to try to make sense out of those things. They were raising a possum, fattening them up, and getting, so, but yeah, so I just wondered, you know, and corn and stuff, of course, we had the mound builders and all that, and all the corn was everywhere, right?
yeah, it was, yeah,
Yeah.
by that time, by this time.
And of course, limestone, the Gaffney and the limestone up there, this part is also stretches to Lawrence County over into Poplar Spring.
Is there
The western
limestone
part.
here?
Pardon?
There's limestone here?
Yeah, they tried to get limestone, and a number of places they milled it for a while, and they just used, I think, for agriculture is what they were getting it, but yeah. So that's it.
Thank you, Junior.
But the
Appreciate
crops, we did have, you look on the Kaiser Helms map
Yeah,
with all the detail about that, and you will find limestone deposits, and that's all part of that
yeah.
geographic or geologic pattern that caused it's a limestone up there too. But it's not as good here as what I have.
Yeah. Yes.
What other ingredient to making iron would be the heat source, and which probably would be coal or coke coal?
It was charcoal that was their heat source.
Really?
Yes. There were charcoal bearers, or there was a whole industry, charcoal industry. You know, they would dig pits in the ground, and then they would take hickory logs or whatever, throw them in there, set them on fire, and then cover them over. And that's how charcoal was made. Then they would, you know, after it cooked itself into charcoal, then they would do that. Put those in these foundries. Now, I don't know all the steps involved in these iron foundries that they did have, because it's been like pulling teeth for me to find out all the details, but I will tell you what details I have learned. And is that they would find a spot close to a hill, a steep hill, and they would, at the base of that hill, they would start to build their furnaces out of, you know, thick, heavy stone, granite or whatever. As they got closer to the top, they may be using bricks to make these chimneys. And what they would do was they would just have to take like wheelbarrow loads of this iron ore and dump it in the top of that furnace, and it would go all the way down to the bottom. At the bottom, they would be burning the charcoal, and they had these big leather bellows that would be forcing air, you know, into that furnace, and it would be heating up to like 2,000 degrees. And again, you know, the iron ore dumped in the top. At a certain point, you mix limestone with that, and it formed, they got the impurities out of it, it formed slag. But they just dug pits at the bottom of these furnaces in the ground, and it would do, you know, a little central axis, and then, you know, shallow pits coming off the side of it. And as the iron melted out, it would come down, it would run through that little trace through the dirt, and then into those side pieces, which were called pigs. And that's how you got pig iron. And then they would sell that pig iron to the blacksmith shops, and there were a lot of blacksmith shops around.
That's smelting iron. The foundry would take the pigs and melt them and cast them into anchors or cannons.
Okay. Yeah. So,
That process is just like blacksmith, what you're talking about, you know, the bellows and the
Yeah.
charcoal and the heat it stick like glue,
Right,
welding it together.
right. Yeah. So, a lot of blacksmith shops.
About every farm had any size to it, had a blacksmith shop. Had to repair and make your own tools.
Yeah.
So, back on the clearing the trees,
Yeah,
and you mentioned poplar, you're talking about what we call yellow poplar here.
Yeah.
It's not a real poplar, a magnolia type tree, right? But they stripped the bark off of that, and on the chestnuts, but they stripped it up large areas on it, right?
right,
Not just small areas.
right. I mean, they were harvesting the bark.
Yeah.
You know, and I would imagine they even fashioned ladders of some sort. And they would take a stone knife and, slice it, then, slice it all the way around, just peel it off.
It's kind of hard. I see a lot of beavers chew all the way around the tree, and they don't kill it.
I know, that is surprising. There's an inn in Bryson City, North Carolina, the Fremont Inn. Boy, if y'all ever want to have a good time, it's the most peaceful setting you can imagine. And it was built in 1923. It was built by a lumber magnate who there was a slowdown in business in 1923. So he decided he was going to build this big inn. And the whole bottom floor is wormy chestnut. It is just incredible. And the whole second floor is just, oak that he harvested from the forest there. But the siding on the Fremont Inn is poplar bark. And it's been there for over 100 years. It's just, really, really nice, really unique. Yes.
Wasn't there a big die-off of chestnuts?
Yeah.
Mhm.
The chestnut blight, that was a devastation. That was in the 1920s. But the chestnut blight was devastating.
Never did have a chestnut to eat. I wish I had had one roasted on the fire, to talk about. Never had one of those.
Yeah.
In the spring, I guess when the sap's rising, the bark is kind of loose, and then you can peel it off, and that's up north. It's paper mills and all. They would take something like a hose straightened out, like people did to walk, and they would take it and keep peeling it back, and they take the bark off, because they didn't want the bark to
Yes.
make paper out of it. And I imagine that's probably when the Indians took the
Yes.
bark off the tree, when it would separate pretty easy. And,
I didn't think of that being a seasonal type practice.
yeah.
Excuse me, but I can see how it would be.
Yeah, when the sap starts rising again.
Yeah.
They found the easy way to do it.
Oh, yeah. Well, folks, I can sit here and talk all day long.
Thank you.